It's a fundamental part of our daily lives. We earn it, spend it, and in some cases, at least here in the United States, burn it as an effigy of the country's founder. But even though we all use it every single day, there are still many things about money that most of us don't know. That includes me. Hi, I'm the host. This is my channel, The Epic Story of a Global Currency. Here are 10 crazy things I learned about money while writing it. Before there was cash, there was bartering. And before that, there were bananas. Okay, maybe not bananas specifically, but certainly something very similar. We tend to think of money as this concrete thing, something solid and tangible. But until about 8,000 years ago, money didn't really exist. There was no universally accepted form of payment. Instead, people would trade goods and services directly in a process known as barter. The problem with barter, however, is it requires what Thomas Sowell calls the coincidence of wants. So let's say you're a hunter-gatherer living in, prehistoric Ohio. You have a surplus of venison and an extra spear that you want to trade. But your friend Bob, he doesn't eat meat, and he already has 5 spears. So unless Bob wants a 6th spear, you can't trade, and therefore you're both worse off. It took thousands of years for humans to come up with the concept of money, a medium of exchange that everyone could agree on and accept, but once they did, they could trade anything for anything else. If you had 10 chickens and I had a bag of corn, we could trade 3 chickens for a bag of corn. And because we'd both agreed that corn and chickens were worth the same, we'd both be happy with the transaction. So who invented money? Well, the answer depends on what you consider money. Archaeologists have found cowrie shells, small sea snails with a hole drilled through them, used as currency as far back as 1200 BCE. Other cultures used cattle, rice, beads made from various materials, and even large stones called wampum by Native Americans. In China, paper money first appeared around the 7th century CE, and in Europe during the Middle Ages, people used promissory notes, basically checks written on merchants to pay for purchases. But despite all these examples, none of them worked exactly like modern money. They either represented actual items of value, or they were used only within specific groups or markets. For a long time, scholars believe the invention of money came during the Bronze Age, around 3000 BC, in Mesopotamia. But in 2020, scientists in Israel announced they discovered evidence of a sophisticated trade network that may have used cowrie shells as currency as early as 7500 BCE, nearly 10,000 years ago. What makes this significant is that it pushed back the timeline for the emergence of currency by 3,000 years, and forced academics to rethink their theories about where money came from. But when it comes to money, it's not just what you use that's important, but also how much you get paid. And since money's inception, people have done whatever they can to get more of it. During the Civil War, counterfeiting became a crime in and of itself. Major General James Fry of the Union Army had the task of tracking down counterfeiters who produced more than 300,000 fake greenbacks. He soon realized they weren't operating in Confederate territory, but in northern states like Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania. Some were immigrants who wanted to make a quick buck, but others were well-to-do businessmen, including a former mayor of a major U.S. city. Even though the Roman Empire fell over 1,500 years ago, rumors persist that a secret stash of Roman treasure exists somewhere under the floor of the U.S. Capitol building. Legend has it that in 1859, the British ambassador to the U.S. was searching for a way to repay Britain's debt to America after the War of 1812. He decided to do what any reasonable person would do and rob the U.S. Treasury. But when he got there, he found that the building was being renovated and the money was being stored in the Capitol building instead. So instead of waiting around until construction finished, he snuck into the Capitol, loaded up on gold, and fled. Unfortunately, the ship carrying the treasure wound up wrecked near Bermuda, and only $260,000 of the $7 million ever resurfaced. While the story sounds plausible, there's no hard evidence to support it, nor is there any proof that the ambassador was given permission to take the gold in the first place. In the mid-19th century, the Austrian army was fighting against Ottoman forces in the Middle East. At the time, the Austrians didn't have enough guns for everyone, so they recruited Jewish soldiers in exchange for exemption from military conscription. After winning several key battles, the recruits demanded to be paid according to their contracts. The problem was Austria didn't have the funds to meet their obligation, so instead, they paid their debts with Ottoman coins that were considered worthless in Austria, but were legal tender in Turkish territories. Overnight, the coins suddenly became valuable and caused a financial panic. Although the situation was resolved quickly, this bizarre story demonstrates how relative value is everything when it comes to money. Even if something is stamped with an official seal and endorsed by a government, it's only worth what people believe it to be worth. By the late 1800s, people had been using forms of credit for hundreds of years, everything from informal IOS to formal banknotes. But by the 1870s, it was clear the Wild West needed a more efficient banking system. Enter the Bank of the Republic, a commercial bank established in San Francisco in 1865 to finance trade between California and the newly acquired Alaska Territory. Just 5 years later, it merged with another bank to create the Bank of California, one of the first statewide commercial banks in the country, but it wasn't without its critics. Newspapers across the nation mocked the bank and its charismatic president, John S. Hiddle. The reason Hiddle had started issuing his own brand of banknotes, printed in red ink, since money was typically blue or black, people assumed the red notes were counterfeit and refused to accept them. Eventually, the ridicule forced the bank to recall the notes and pay customers in other forms of currency. While the incident ended without incident, it remains one of the first recorded instances of widespread confusion about the validity of U.S. currency. Over the years, paper money has become commonplace. But before it was standard, the predominant form of currency was metal coins, sometimes stamped with pictures of important figures from mythology, religion, or even contemporary politics. But few countries have been more prolific with their coinage than the ancient Greeks. From 650 to 146 BCE, Athens alone minted over 40 million coins, which means they were probably onto something. But it turns out, what they were doing was quite literally counterfeiting. The famous owl-adorned Athenian tetradrachm became the gold standard for coinage because it contained 27 grams of pure silver. But as silver prices fluctuated, so did the amount of silver in each coin. By the end of the Peloponnesian War, Athenian coins had as little as 10% of the required silver content. To fix the problem, Athens turned to Persia for help, who sent over a ton of silver for new coins. But this also caused inflation, driving the price of imports up so high that Greece went bankrupt by 146 BCE. The moral of the story? Tampering with the purity of coins can lead to major economic problems, which is why today the composition of U.S. currency is regulated by federal law. Sometime around the year 1000, the Viking explorer Eric the Red stumbled upon the island of Greenland and settled there immediately. Soon, however, the Christian king of Norway seized control of the island and appointed Eric as governor. After Eric left office, he tried to raise money to purchase land in Iceland, but no one would lend him any. Unable to afford property, Eric sailed north and founded the first settlement in North America, which he named Vinland. There, the Vikings enjoyed an abundance of wild grapes, which they used to produce wine. Eventually, however, they ran out of supplies and abandoned the settlement, returning home with tales of a faraway land filled with wild grapes and riches beyond measure. Inspired by these stories, Europeans spent centuries looking for Vinland, but it wasn't until 1960 that archaeologists proved its existence and revealed its location: L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. With proof of European contact confirmed, historians continue to search for the fate of Vinland's inhabitants. Did they simply leave, or did they perish in the harsh environment? Only time will tell. As the world grew and trade expanded, larger and larger sums of money changed hands. Initially, private citizens rarely dealt with such amounts. However, by the late 1700s, fortunes worth tens of millions in today's money were common. One such fortune belonged to Jacob Barker, an English merchant whose family amassed wealth shipping brandy between England and the Netherlands. Eventually, however, the lucrative business attracted competitors, leading to a costly legal dispute. After losing the case in court, Barker couldn't pay his debts and his creditors seized his estate. But when they tried to auction off his mansion, it didn't sell. Desperate for money, they tore the house down and sold the materials to builders. Today, 4 buildings in London bear witness to the folly of one rich man's greed. In November 1923, Germany was in chaos. Inflation had reached 3,250%. A worker earning 200 marks a month would need 4,500 marks to buy the same goods just 2 weeks later. People carried around wheelbarrows of cash for basic necessities, and a German billion-mark note was worth less than 1/3 of a U.S. penny. On top of this, rumors swirled that the new currency would feature images of vampires, leading to widespread panic. Now, whether or not those rumors were true is anyone's guess, but it doesn't matter. Faced with unprecedented hyperinflation, the German government took drastic measures to reassure its citizens that the new money would be reliable and strong. How? By putting witches and devils on their banknotes. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. For more of the weirdest, craziest, and most incredible stories in human history, check out my channel, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.